The moment she heard the catapult release, her face went pale. Her SUV was already in the air, tilted sideways, spinning like a metal bullet over my hayfield while the whole HOA crowd stood frozen by the fence. I remembered the exact sound it made, too. A violent creak from the timber arm, a chain snapping loose. Then the horrible crunch of expensive glass meeting hard earth on the far side of my property. For 1 second, nobody moved. Even Brenda, who had spent 8 months acting like my farm belonged to her, just stared with her mouth half open and her designer sunglasses sliding down her nose. Then she screamed. Not a polite, offended scream. A really full-body, shrieking meltdown that echoed across the pasture and scared 3 of my chickens clean out of the yard. Her hands flew up, her shoes sank into the mud, and she started yelling that I had destroyed her vehicle. That she was calling the sheriff, that I was going to regret this for the rest of my life. But standing there with my hands still on the release lever, I didn't feel panic. I felt something colder than that. I felt the kind of calm that only comes after months of being pushed, ignored, and treated like you are the problem for defending your own land. Let me take you back to how this all started. My name is Marcus, and I own a farm that's been in my family for 4 generations. It isn't some hobby plot with a pretty sign at the gate. It's real land, real work, real debt, and real sweat. I wake up before sunrise, fix fences in the rain, pull equipment out of mud, and spend most of my days trying to keep animals alive and machinery running. I know every ditch, every rut, every broken board on that property because I built my life around it. That place is not just where I live. It's who I am. The trouble started the day Brenda moved into the upscale HOA development across the road from my north pasture. She was the kind of woman who looked permanently offended by dirt. Perfect hair, nice nails, perfect clothes, and a smile that never reached her eyes. The first time I met her, she was standing in my lane with one hand on her hip, staring at my no trespassing sign like it had personally insulted her. She calmly told me her name wasn't important, but her husband sat on the HOA board. And everyone around here shares the community access lane. There was no community access lane. There was my lane, my fence, and a locked gate with my name on the deed. But Brenda spoke with the confidence of someone who had never been told no in her life. At first, I assumed it was just attitude. It's a bad first impression. The kind of thing you shrug off and move on from. I was entirely wrong. Because 4 days later, her silver SUV was parked dead center on my gravel turnout, right by the hay barn, while she strolled across my field with a coffee in one hand and her phone in the other. She acted like she was visiting a resort. That was the first warning sign. And by the time I realized what she was really doing, she had already decided my farm was her personal parking lot. The first time I asked Brenda to move her SUV, I did it calmly. I walked up to her in front of her own driver door, pointed out the fence line, and told her that she was on private property and needed to leave immediately. I expected some embarrassment, maybe a half-hearted apology. Instead, she looked at me like I was a clerk interrupting her lunch. She said the land didn't look used, which was probably the dumbest sentence anyone had ever spoken on a working farm. Then, she said my truck tracks were blocking her preferred route, and since her HOA had easements, I should be more neighborly. I told her to show me the easement on paper. That's when the first lie came out. She said the board had explained it to her verbally. No document, no survey, no recorded right-of-way, just her interpretation of what she wanted the rules to mean. I kept my voice even, told her again that she was trespassing, and gently asked her to move the SUV or I would call the sheriff. She laughed, not because anything was funny, but because she believed nothing would happen to her. So I called the sheriff. The deputy who came out was polite, professional, and clearly not impressed by Brenda's performance. He looked over the fence, asked her where exactly she thought she had permission to be, and then asked to see any paperwork proving access. She had absolutely none of it. He explained that my gate, my field, and my turnout were all private property, and that parking there without permission could be considered trespassing. Brenda went quiet for about 15 seconds, which was the closest thing to accountability I had seen from her. I thought that would end it. It didn't. 5 days later, her SUV was back. Only this time she parked closer to the barn and blocked the delivery truck I had coming in with large feed. I found out when the driver called me and asked if my farm had turned into a storage lot for luxury vehicles. By the time I got back, Brenda was standing there with a clipboard, taking pictures of my fence posts like she was building a case against me. That was when she escalated. She sent me a formal HOA letter claiming my property obstructed neighborhood sightlines, that my machinery created an eyesore, and that my entrance gate was too close to the shared access road. It was written in that fake corporate language people use when they want to sound official without actually saying anything meaningful. Attached to it was a fine notice, not for her parking, for me. According to the HOA, I was being penalized for altering the scenic character of the community. I couldn't believe it. She had trespassed, blocked my work, ignored a deputy, and then tried to fine me for just not making my farm prettier to her taste. I brought the letter to my attorney, along with my deed, the survey map, and the county records I had pulled myself. That's when the twist hit me. The access lane Brenda kept talking about wasn't an HOA easement at all. It was a maintenance strip, and the recorded language specifically prohibited non-authorized vehicles from using it, except for utility and emergency access. That meant Brenda had not just been rude. She had been violating a recorded restriction for months, and there was more. The county file showed the HOA had been expanding its community use claims for years without legal backing, relying on residents like Brenda who never bothered to verify what they were told. In other words, she had been parking on my property and acting bold because she assumed nobody would ever challenge her. Now, I had the paper trail to clearly prove she was wrong. The moment I understood what the records really said, I stopped reacting and started planning. I installed cameras at both ends of the lane, documented every vehicle that crossed the boundary, and had my own attorney send a cease and desist notice to Brenda and the HOA board. The letter was simple. Stop trespassing, stop using my land as a parking area, and stop sending fake fines based on property they did not control at all. Brenda responded by showing up at my gate with 4 HOA board members and an attitude sharp enough to cut wire. She said I was intimidating the neighborhood and claimed the cameras were an invasion of privacy. That would have been hilarious if she hadn't been standing on my side of the fence while pointing at my barn like she owned the skyline. She even tried to act like my attorney's letter was a suggestion rather than a legal warning. So, I invited them all to a meeting on my property. Not a shouting match. Not a voicemail war. A real meeting with the deputy who had already been there, my attorney on speaker, and the county recorder's office on the phone line confirming the deed and easement history. I set the table under the oak tree by the barn, laid out the survey maps, the photos, the HOA notice, and the county records in neat stacks and waited. Brenda arrived in flashy sunglasses and confidence. She left with neither. As soon as my attorney read the recorded language aloud, her board buddies stopped pretending. One of them kept blinking at the map like the lines might rearrange themselves if he stared long enough. Brenda kept insisting that everyone knew the lane was shared, but the deputy cut through that in one sentence. Shared does not mean private land becomes your personal parking spot. How's the exact moment she underestimated me for the last time, because I wasn't done. I showed them the camera footage. Brenda entering my field repeatedly, parking at all hours, leaving muddy tire ruts that damaged the grass and disturbed my fencing. Then I showed them the bill from my equipment repair shop after her SUV had forced me to maneuver around it and damaged a wheel rim on my utility trailer. My attorney then explained that if the board kept pushing a false claim of access, they were now on notice that any further use could expose them to legal liability. Brenda tried one last time to talk over him. That's when I calmly said, "Before you say another word, I'd like you to look at the restriction attached to Parcel 27C. She did. And the room went silent. Because Parcel 27C was the exact strip of land she had been using as if it were hers. And right there, standing beside my barn while 4 HOA board members stared at the same document that had been ignored for months, I realized something important. People love to mock the person who stays calm too long, but calm is not weakness. Calm is what you look like when you already have the evidence. If stories like this are your kind of justice, hit like and subscribe to HOA Neighbor right now. Because the part that came next is what finally made Brenda's whole little parking empire collapse. The final collapse happened faster than Brenda expected and slower than she deserved. Once the county office confirmed the restriction in writing, the HOA had no room left to twist the facts. Their notice against me was withdrawn the same day. Their claim that the lane was community access vanished once the recorded documents were reviewed by council. And when the board realized Brenda had been using my land without permission, they did what every cowardly organization does when it gets caught. They tried to act like the problem had always been a misunderstanding. It wasn't. It was trespass. Brenda's SUV was still stuck in the soft edge of the field where the catapult had launched it. And now that everyone knew the full story, nobody was eager to defend her. The sheriff returned with a tow order. The HOA board had to reimburse the county for the time spent untangling their false claim. And Brenda was personally responsible for the damage to my fence, my turnout, and the repair work needed on the field. She also received a formal warning for any repeated unauthorized entry onto private property. The part that really got to her was not the paperwork, it was the public part. The same people she had spent months trying to impress, local neighbors, board members, even a few of the residents who had quietly been watching the whole thing unfold, saw exactly what she was. Not powerful, not entitled, just wrong. The catapult itself became a local legend, but not because I was trying to make a spectacle. I built it because I had run out of polite ways to say no to someone who refused to hear it. It wasn't about revenge for me. It was about making a line visible when every other boundary had been ignored. Sometimes angry people only understand force when they've ignored every warning, every document, and every voice telling them to stop. After that day, Brenda never parked on my farm again. The HOA changed its wording in the next meeting. The board revised the access policy. And the residents, who had once repeated Brenda's version of events, suddenly found a new interest in reading deeds before opening their mouths. My farm went back to what it had always been. Work, weather, animals, and the steady rhythm of a life built on honest effort. And for me, that was the real victory. I didn't just keep my land, I kept my dignity. I proved that being loud doesn't make someone always right, and wearing expensive sunglasses doesn't give you title to another person's property. The best part was watching Brenda realize, in front of everybody, that her confidence had been built on someone else's silence. And that silence was over. Before you leave this story behind, I want to ask you something specific. Have you ever dealt with someone who acted like rules were only for other people until the paperwork finally shut them down? Put your experience in the comments. And if you want the next chapter, I can tell you what happened when the HOA tried to challenge the county records 6 months later. Make sure to watch HOA Neighbor so you never miss an update. We upload fresh stories about crazy neighborhood disputes and boundary battles every single week. Thanks for watching today's episode. Drop your craziest stories below, and I will see you in the next video.